Hey, I'm Sven Masterson, one of the founders and mentors in the Mentoring Men community. I show men how to transform painful, broken, and stuck relationships into deeply connected, passionate, and thriving relationships. And in this video, I want to talk to the man who has experienced the emotional pain and discomfort of feeling like his wife or partner has not been there for him, maybe on a long-term basis or in a critical time, such as a severe challenge, sickness, job loss, or something similar. Believe it or not, this is actually quite a common problem. A lot of men from around the world reach out to us with this being their chief complaint, or among the many complaints that they have about their long-term relationship. We're going to talk about how this causes a lot of despondency in men, and I personally have witnessed this be the catalyst that oftentimes is the straw that breaks the proverbial camel's back in leading to the dissolution of a long-term relationship like marriage. In fact, I would say that it leads to many relationships ending. But the good news is, in our practice with men around the world, we're able to see about 85% of those particular challenges and relationships come to a place of healing and restoration and help a man move through this very painful experience and on to the life he wants. And so this video, I'm going to talk about some things we've discovered in that process of helping men, and hopefully you'll feel more enlightened for it. We're going to talk about my own personal story with this challenge. I'm going to talk to you about the three most common patterns we see in a man's life that leads to moments like this. Now, when I mention we're going to talk about a man's life, the reason we're going to talk about that is because we're a men's community, we're men's mentors. We're by no means insinuating that women have no personal work and development to do, only that as men who are mentoring men and not women, we're not qualified or interested in speaking to what women need to do differently. So our video is going to focus on the man in the relationship. Although we trust that women watching this, there'll be a lot to gain from watching it in both your understanding of men, but also hopefully your understanding of yourself. We're going to talk about these three dysfunctional patterns and how to address and understand each one. I'm going to also talk to you near the end about how to experience more of what you want in a relationship and less of what you don't. And then lastly, I'm going to answer the question for the men who might be wondering, how do I know when it's time to move on? All right, I'm going to start with my story. My name is Sven Masterson. I live in north central Pennsylvania with my wife Zelda, who I've been married to for 29 years. We have 6 children, we live on a homestead, and we have a beautiful life. But it was not always that way. In fact, for about the first 20 years, I struggled with many of these same things. I felt unsupported, unloved, unvalued, uncared for. I felt unappreciated. And I felt like a lot of times my wife was against me, in particular during some very critical and tough challenges in our life. I can think of at least 3 scenarios that I felt like were really requiring the most from me that any scenario had ever really required. I felt embattled. I felt like I was fighting the fight of my life, and my wife, instead of being there for me, didn't feel like she was there for me. In fact, she felt adversarial. And I did not know what to do with this. In fact, the anger and the frustration and the resentment and the contempt was reaching epic proportions for me. And it's what led me to reach out to a man who became a coach and mentor for me, another man who became a mentor for me, and it began my own journey of healing some of these things. You see, I had this yearning for this soft, feminine warmth and care that I just was not experiencing in those first 20 years. And I thought unequivocally that I had a wife problem. Now, if you caught the beginning of this story, I'm still married to the same woman, and I have the life that I want. And so what changed? Well, I hope to divulge some of those points in this video. What changed was understanding some of the patterns that exist in a relationship, at least with men in Western cultures. I assume these exist in other places, but we find these with a lot of prevalence and repetition and predictability in men, at least in Western culture. And so here's the 3 main patterns. When I say main patterns, I'm not insinuating there are no other patterns, just that these are the 3 ones that we see the most. The first common dysfunctional pattern is that a man mistakes his unaddressed childhood wounds as coming from his partner. And because of this, he seeks out a mommy sort of energy from a wife or a girlfriend to fix these tender areas. This was a big part of my own journey. I didn't realize that just from the emotional pain of growing up, we carry baggage into a relationship, and many of us, unless we do a lot of significant personal development work or therapy or counseling before marriage, have simply not had time to let these kind of come to the surface and address them. I would also advocate that marriage is the context where we find resolution to these things, and that marriage is innately filled with sometimes with moments of pain, while the process of being married puts us in a place where these things float to the surface and can be addressed. And that's exactly what happened to me. Those 20 years were actually accomplishing something that I didn't realize was in need of happening. Now, I got married at 20 years old, and so that didn't help either. Not that I'm against young marriages. I still have a beautiful life. I don't regret my decision. But I really had no time to address some of these issues from my own childhood, these pains, these traumas, these frustrations, and we carry those deep within ourselves. And when we get married, we still feel that emotional pain, and we tend to think it's our partner doing it to us. You see, we're having an emotional experience like feeling unappreciated or unvalued or uncared for or unloved. And because that's our experience and we're living and moving in the world, we think our partner is doing that to us. They're to blame. And this is a significant repeated theme in really all marriages around the third stage of marriage, what we call the disillusionment stage. It's when each partner is convinced that the source of their emotional pain is their partner. And I would suggest 9 times out of 10, that's actually not really true. We're just feeling our own story. And so this shows up in this particular common dysfunction with men who have these places where they just long for a certain kind of unresolved care and touch and warmth from mom. And when you get into a marriage like this and you kind of have this deep longing for a certain expression of the feminine, not only do you put a significant amount of pressure on your partner, but you also inadvertently request or seek from her a very mothering, mommy kind of energy. Now, some women may find this cute at first, but once a woman starts having children in a relationship and knows what it's like to feel the dependency of children, what it's like to be on call 24/7, then she starts to see a man acting like this through the same lens that she sees the baby crying in the middle of the night who needs to be nursed or fed. And she starts to resent this. She starts to think to herself, why is this 20 or 30 or 40 or 50-year-old man, why is he acting just like the kids? And she starts to equivocate you or me with the children, and it does not feel good. In fact, women would say this feels icky. It's certainly not a very sexually attractive or romantically attractive way to be. And so this is a common one. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. The second one is mistaking our dependency for needing support. We're going to talk about that in great depth. Lastly, we're going to talk about insecurity and fear of a partner. These 3 patterns are behind why the bulk of men we encounter experience this feeling of she's not there for me. All right, we talked a little bit already about this mommy or romantic partner energy. Let's review it real quick about basically you don't want to feel to your partner like the kids feel to your partner, or she's going to, in her mind or heart or person, she's going to see you as just being one of the kids. It's going to be very hard for a woman to be attracted and thus want to offer partner kind of support to a man who feels just like the children. And so if you're living in one of those kind of scenarios where you're seeking out a wife that dotes on you like you wish or you did have a mother who did, when you're seeking out a woman who makes your lunch for you every day and does everything perfectly for you and treats you like June Cleaver, well, you might be operating in this space. And like I said, very few women find this attractive. Many who seem to be okay with it may themselves just be using that as a way to find their own sense of value and meaning. And in our experience, that ends up coming to a expiration date. And when it does, it can mean very bad things for the relationship. Lastly, few women don't really want to be the caretaker of a man in the relationship, other than this kind of thing I mentioned where women feel a certain sense of their self-worth based on caretaking. But outside of those women, the average woman on the street who dreams about being swept off her feet by a man is not thinking that she's going to have to take care of that man and be his emotional and physical support system for the rest of her life. And so when a man lives in this energy, he oftentimes has this feeling of, I need her to be there for me. But the way he wants her to be there for him is very much in a mothering capacity. And in our experience, that does not really help long-term attraction, romance, and sexual intimacy in a relationship. So how do you address this? How do you begin to unwind this very complicated thing? Well, the first thing is you have to understand and accept that you have this desire for nurturing from the feminine, and that it can be kind of a little dysfunctional at times. Now, when I say accept it, I don't mean approve it. You're going to hear me use the word accept and acceptance a lot in our videos, and we do not believe this is the same thing as approval. Acceptance just means see something with acknowledgement that it is. And so you can't change anything in your life until you're willing to see it and accept it and acknowledge that it's there. And so all of these, you recognize this pattern. We must accept the areas that we have been dysfunctional and seek to understand why. Now, the next thing is to seek out healthier nurturing experiences with feminine outside of your marriage. Now, there's lots of ways to do that I'm not going to get into the fine detail here. Some of my favorites are to be in nature. Nature itself has a very feminine quality to it. Seeking out grandmothers, aunts, our own mothers, seeking restoration and some healing in the relationships that maybe had a lot of friction in the beginning, if your parents are still alive. Seeking out friends, people in community groups who are the feminine, who you could just get to know, you could experience their, the great aspects of warmth and nurturing and care that oftentimes come with the feminine. And we'll talk about that deeper in another video. I don't want to get stuck there. The next thing is to give yourself the space and the opportunity to mourn and grieve for the things that you wish had been different in your childhood. The reality is most people have things that they experienced in their childhood that were painful. I definitely understand that. I experienced those. And if we can't get through it by allowing ourselves to just, again, go back and accept and without approval that it happened, that we experienced it, mourn over that, grieve it, allow yourself to feel the pain from having experienced those things. It's a very normal and healthy and necessary process to move into the rest of your life. And the point of that, like all grieving, is to get through grieving, let that happen, and then move on through the rest of your life. You can't really move on in life until you allow the grieving process to happen. And so we just have to grieve some of these very painful things in our lives. The next thing is you can join a men's community like ours who has experience in helping men navigate these spaces. We have hundreds of men from all over the world, many of whom share this particular story or have. And so we have a lot of men who have navigated these spaces, men who've grieved and mourned the challenges of childhood, the pains they picked up there, and they know how to guide one another through that process with poise and grace and strength and courage. Lastly, I would encourage you, if you need some help with that, book a complimentary session with myself or one of their mentors. We'll give you an hour or more of our time simply to talk through these things, hear you, to see you, to help and encourage you. No strings attached. That's just our offer of a gift to you. The next dysfunctional area we need to talk about is this area of confusing dependency versus support. Dependency is not support. And confusion over this shows up in most relationships at some point. And it shows up bidirectionally. It shows up in men and women. And it forms the basis of a lot of what this disillusionment stage of marriage is all about. So let's talk about some key differences between dependency and support. Okay? Dependency is a frequent, keyword, frequent reliance upon other people to meet ongoing common needs. Support, on the other hand, is an infrequent assistance that's given to somebody to meet temporary and uncommon needs. I'll use just an example from my own life. Last week or 2 weeks ago, was it? My wife, who's an avid tennis player, sprained her ankle or foot during tennis. She came home, sat down, iced it, went to get up to go to bed, and she could not walk to the bedroom. And so I went over to her, put my arm around her, had her put her arm around me, and I helped her kind of hobble her way back to the bedroom so she could get ready for the evening to go to sleep. What I offered there was support. You see, Zelda walks around on her own 2 feet all the time. And yet she couldn't in this particular instance. It was an uncommon temporal need for assistance. And so what I offered her was support. Now, dependency would be if she asked me to do that every night, despite having nothing wrong with her feet or ankles. Or just coming to a place where she said, yeah, it's just so much easier when you carry me. And that's a big difference. Let's talk about some more differences. Dependency seeks escape or delay from personal responsibility, whereas support actually seeks the return there to personal responsibility as soon as possible. Now, Zelda is a mature woman. She was not seeking dependency, and so she didn't want me to have to do that, but circumstances warranted that I kind of help her hobble her way back to the bedroom. But her own goal was to be back in the place of walking around on her own 2 feet as soon as possible, because support seeks a return to our agency as soon as possible. Dependency is rooted in overwhelming insecurity, where support, on the other hand, is rooted in overwhelming circumstances. And there is a huge difference between insecurity and circumstances. Dependency erodes and discourages something we would call personal autonomy. That's the ability to live our own life under our own power, where support respects and encourages personal autonomy. It's not looking to replace my autonomy in my own life. It's just looking for some assistance with it temporarily. Dependency hinders self-confidence, and support enhances self-confidence. It gives you the uplift to get through just a tough time and to regain your sense of taking care of yourself. Let's talk about some more. Dependency is usually accompanied by some sense of entitlement, judgment, and frustration with the people that you are trying to be dependent upon. Now, support is rarely like this. Support is usually accompanied with responsibility, your own self-responsibility. It's accompanied by appreciation and gratitude for the people offering you support. It's not walking around with a sense of entitlement, and it's generally not frustrated with the person who's offering you support. However, you might be frustrated with your circumstances. That's normal. Let's talk about another one. Dependency erodes relationships, and in our experience, it creates distance. If you have a wife who's saying, I need space, if you have a person who says, I love you, but I'm not in love with you, if you have a partner who is not interested intimately, one who is saying, I think we need a separation or divorce, here too, about 8.5 times out of 10, the problem is actually dependency. Because dependency, when we look to other people to take care of our common needs, creates judgment when they don't, or when they don't do it according to the way we like. And when we judge people, we or they create distance from one another, and that's where you get the distance that comes with dependency. Now, support is not like this. Support is different. It builds relationship. It creates closeness. If you've ever spent time in tough circumstances with other humans where you're all mutually caring for one another and supporting one another, you know that it's one of the most binding and intimacy-building things you can experience with people. People who experience hard things together usually feel, if they have a support mindset, feel better for it on the other side. They don't feel more distant, they feel more close. So I want you to ask yourself, do I feel distant from my spouse or do I feel close? If you feel distant, you're most likely encountering judgment. and judgment is a dead giveaway that you have dependency on a person. Now, if you want to talk more about that, you'll have an opportunity to see how you can do that at the end. How do you address this issue with support versus dependency? The first is to admit and accept where you've been living with dependency. You have to understand your dependency and where it comes from. Now, in the Mentoring Men community, we have, as people who come from technical backgrounds, debugging and troubleshooting backgrounds and whatnot, we are really good at spotting patterns. And some common patterns we have discovered in our work with men is that you can always find a common kind of path behind dependency. That starts with self-limiting beliefs, meaning I place my dependency on other people where I don't believe I have what it takes to meet my own needs. And if we go further, well, why don't you believe you have what it takes to meet your own needs? We find shame, which is the conclusion that I don't measure up, and that is a conclusion based on judgment. And then there's a whole cadre of things behind why you might judge yourself. But really that is the path. And so that is a learned set of beliefs and thoughts and actions and habits, and you can unwind and relearn new and powerful ways to let go of dependency. And we teach men around the world how to do that every day. The next thing you must do is take ownership of every area you have been expressing dependency, and you have to replace it with self-reliance. Now, some people like to beat up on us for the mention of self-reliance. Somehow self-reliance has become some sort of, like evil thing to say in the world, which is ridiculous. When we talk about self-reliance, we're not talking about becoming a lone wolf and going out and living, out in the wilderness by yourself with no other humans. That's not what we're talking about, self-reliance. We're talking not about isolationism. We're talking about replacing dependency with living your life under the power of yourself instead of the power of other people. If you're not self-reliant, you're other-reliant. And we're not talking about support here. We're talking about letting go of dependency. We are clearly pro-support. It's amazing to me that people think that we are disinterested in having supported relationships with other humans. We have a men's community, a global men's community that offers this, and yet still people think that we are somehow advocating living in isolation. I don't understand how people come to this conclusion, but it's important to us that you clearly understand what we mean by self-reliance. How else can you do this? Case in point, join a men's community. Join a men's community where only support is promoted and offered and not dependency. The Mentoring Men community is a great place for this. You will not find men who are creating dependencies on one another. You'll find men who are creating community and brotherhood, appreciation and respect, and support. And support, as we've mentioned, is seeking at getting people back on their own 2 feet. And that's exactly what our community does and embraces and helps men with every day. Next thing, book a complimentary session with us. Myself or one of the other mentors in our community will talk to you further about what to do here. How do you escape from dependency? It's a process. It's not overnight. You should plan on at least 6 months to see a meaningful difference in that process. But yet, we're experts at it. We help guys clear dependency out of their life all the time. We give them very meaningful tool sets for doing so, all that are not woo-woo or based on shallow, stupid things, but based on real, actionable steps that you can understand and practice and learn to do today. All right, let's talk about this next dysfunctional pattern, the fear of a partner. Now, these men are usually conflict avoidant. They're classic nice guys. That's a reference to Dr. Robert Glover's book, No More Mr. Nice Guy. If you haven't read that, I'd recommend that you do. These men will not clearly express what they want. And so they run into problems with feeling like a partner is there for them, but yet they haven't really expressed to her what it looks like for her to be there for them. Instead, they assume that they know what she's thinking. They know what she's going to say. They know what motivates her. And they know why she's doing what she does. These men tend to think that they're some sort of mind readers or clairvoyant. They at least act as though they are. They don't walk around consciously saying, Yeah, I read minds, but they're in regular habits of just believing the BS that goes through their heads. And so they have an unhealthy way of basically reading the tea leaves of life and believing the conclusions they come to about their partner. And because of this, they tend not to actually clearly communicate at all. And so much of what they feel unsupported about, their partner has no idea because they've never said it. These men tend to rely on immature tactics that we learn in childhood. Now, when I say immature, I'm not trying to shame you or beat you up. I'm saying immature as in they're not mature. They're from childhood. You learned them early in life and you brought them forward into your adult life, and they don't work for adult life. These would be some tactics like giving somebody the silent treatment, or silently stewing, or going out and pouting, tantrums of some kind, being mopey, melancholy, being cold to a partner because they've upset you, stonewalling, acting sullen. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably saying, well, my wife does those things too. Yeah, I get it. But remember, we're not focused on her, we're focused on us. Because the only thing you and I have the power to change is self. And trust me when I tell you, when you upgrade your methods for expressing yourself as a man, when you step into maturity, here too, about 9 times out of 10, your partner will join you there. Let's talk about this fear of a partner a little bit more. Another thing they do is they mistake their thinking for reality. This kind of goes back to that tea leaves thing. These men experience what a psychologist or a therapist would call cognitive fusion. That's when we get kind of enveloped in our thoughts. We believe all of our thoughts are real. We catastrophize, and we feel that whatever we're feeling in our thinking and our emotions is true. These men haven't figured out, no, you're not experiencing reality. You're experiencing your thinking. I could tell you story after story after story of myself and other men in this, because this is such a common pattern that we do that we can't help it sometimes, and we don't realize just how much we are believing certain things about the world that are not really happening. It's just us feeling our thinking. These men are led by feelings. They haven't learned how to be led yet by values and virtues. They're not led by those principles and concepts. They're led by their interoception, which is feeling your insides. And this is such an unreliable way to live because it's the brain's prediction for what's about to happen next. And that prediction has a very high error rate. And so men that have a fear of a partner are men that are kind of stuck in this way, this immature way from our childhood. There are also men that experience a high degree, because of this system, of feeling powerless in their relationship. And in that same vein, they tend to report very little or low or no intimacy in the relationship. Now, how do you address the fear of a partner? Well, like the others, you have to admit first and accept that this is how you've been living. You've been living with fear. You have to understand that fear, where it comes from, and how to address it. Here too, very similar to dependency, is the same path. We have fear where we have insecurities. And an insecurity just means there's something that we want, we need, or we desire, and we're not sure we can have it unless somebody else gives it to us. And so we become fearful and insecure that a need we have won't be met. But that's all based on the belief that other people meet our needs. That's where it's tied to dependency. And we have dependency. You might remember from a few minutes ago, everywhere we have self-limiting beliefs that have told us that we cannot meet our own needs. And that's always rooted in shame and in judgment. Now, the next thing you need to do to overcome this fear of a partner is take ownership of areas where you have fear in your life by replacing it with self-acceptance and love. This is tied to my last point. Your judgment for yourself is related to, or will be kind of in lockstep with, areas that you do not accept you. You are judging yourself as being not enough, insufficient, lacking. And every area we don't accept ourselves, and we do not have a deep level of love for ourselves, instead we will have fear. And that fear will show up through this path of being afraid of a spouse, afraid of an employer, afraid of a neighbor, afraid of friends. It shows up in nice guy behavior. How do you overcome that? These steps. Now, I am speaking very high level. We have ways that we help men in our community very thoroughly. Again, plan on about 6 months to get through a process of understanding and overcoming your fear, your dependency, your insecurity. But we're good at this. We help men with this around the world every day. You can join that community without a huge 6-month commitment and get started in that process literally right now. Or you can book a complimentary session with myself or one of our mentors, and we can help you begin to look at your fear today as well. Now, how else can you experience, or not how else, how can you experience more of what you want in the relationship? This is a very high level game plan, but this is how you do it. This is how I got through those 20 years of not feeling the things I wanted to, and now have the relationship I want. The first thing is stop waiting for other people to make your life better. It never happens that way. It's never things outside of you that improve your life. It's actually a change within you. And that shift alone will revolutionize and transform your life. You have to take more ownership of your life in the same vein. And that means if you see the need, you have the seed. What do I mean by that? If you want bananas, plant a banana tree. If you want apples, plant an apple tree. If you want closeness and intimacy, be a close, intimate person. If you want compassion and empathy and warmth in your relationship, be those things, right? We have to start first by being a great partner. And a lot of times in our hubris, we don't understand where we're not. Next, address your dependency and fear, as we've already talked about. Mature your love from eros to agape. And that's a whole other video topic. But what that really means in a nutshell is move on from transactional, giving to get kind of love to a different, more mature kind of love that's not based on transaction, but it's based on loving somebody as the fullest expression of who you love to be, not based on their behavior, but based on your value system. You have to stop blaming and stop judging your partner. You're never going to have a woman who supports you in a relationship and the kind of relationship you want if you hang on to blame and judgment and hostility. It's just not going to happen. You're kidding yourself if you think you're going to have it otherwise. And instead, lastly, of demanding loyalty, become the kind of man that a partner wants to lovingly devote herself to supporting. You might not feel like this is possible, or you might feel like you're already that man. Let me tell you, if you're feeling like you're that man and you're frustrated, bitter, and angry that the woman in your life is not this way, you're not quite that man yet. I thought I was for 20 years. People blew all kinds of smoke up my rear end to make me think that I was a great man. But I hadn't learned some of these things. I hadn't learned that you can't hold on to blame, hostility, judgment, and anger and have a person who's devoted lovingly to supporting you. Do those things, change those things, and watch what happens. Okay, let's talk about a few more. Get clear about what you want from your partner. When we ask men, what do you want? Most men can't tell us. They tell us instead what they don't want. But telling somebody what you don't want, though it's helpful, is not at all the same of telling them what you do want. You can't critique a partner for not showing you support, not being there for you, if you can't even clearly define what that looks like. So start there. Get some clarity about what it looks like for your partner to show you support. Then learn to confidently and unapologetically express that, yet without entitlement, without accusation, and without demanding that your partner show this to you. Just simply state, this is who I am, this is what kind of support I want. Next, cultivate excellent personal boundaries. Your boundaries are, contrary to popular fictitious belief, are not for other people. That would just be a rule. Your boundaries are actually boundaries for you. They inform you when to go one step further in a particular direction is to step out of your value system. Now, if you don't know what those values are, you can't possibly know when you've exceeded them. You can't know when you've gone too far. You can't know when it's time to turn around. And that leads me to our next point, knowing when it's time to move on. Without clarity about these things, you can't know when it's time to move on. This is why so many men feel stuck or in limbo, is they simply lack clarity about self, about their value system, and thus they have poor boundaries. And with that trifecta, you cannot move on with clarity because you're not clear. So let's talk about when is it time to move on? How can you know? There's a simple recipe filled with lots of nuance, and I'm not going to try to address all those nuances in this video. The first thing I would say is it's time to move on when you've already addressed your insecurity, your fear, your dependency. Your self-worth is no longer in any way wrapped up into what your partner believes about you, her approval, her affection, her appreciation, her adoration, right? Because if your self-worth is wrapped up in that, it's not self-worth. It's worth that's derived from other people. And here too, most men we talk to actually have this as their self-worth system. Next, you have unconditional high regard for yourself. That means you hold yourself to a standard where you're worthy of love, you're worthy of warmth, compassion, empathy, kindness, not because of your behavior or your performance, but because of your humanity. You see, you can't love other people this way if you don't love you this way. And it's essential that you first have this agape kind of love for you. Next, you're living with authenticity and with integrity. That means your yes is your yes, your no is your no. You're not agreeing to things verbally that you disagree with internally. You've stopped placating and appeasing your wife. You've let go of the fear, and you're living true to your value system. This is one of the hardest steps for most men, and most men are not really ready and equipped to do this well into their 30s and 40s and beyond. Next, from that place of authenticity and integrity, you're clearly communicating what you want and don't want. And next, you've lived all of these ways I've just mentioned with predictability and with reliability and consistency for at least 6 months. Now, a lot of guys are like, 6 months, man, I don't have time for that. If you're saying that right now, you need to address the anxiety you have about the future. Here's the reality. We have witnessed another reliable pattern that men have what I would call like a 72 or 96 hour bias. It's like a man's done something for 4 days, and if he's done it for 4 days, he feels like that's how the last 4 months have been. And it's not true. So we actually have guys kind of log this for 6 months. How am I doing in these areas? And you know, when you're doing reliably well for 6 months, then you're in a good spot to make a decision to end a relationship. Because the reality is, if you haven't done this that well for 6 months, you haven't really given your partner time to adjust to the new you. She hasn't had the opportunity to see, is this real? Or is this a gimmick? Or is this a ploy? And so it's important just for the way relationship dynamics work and how humans learn and how we adjust to give these processes time. And we find that if you try to do it under 6 months, you're just kidding yourself. I know a lot of men's work out there promises such things. These practices, in my opinion, are more oriented at getting money from your wallet to their wallet than getting your relationship from a place of suffering to thriving. And so be very cautious of any program that tells you that you can have a total transformation in your relationship in 9 days or 90 days even. It's very difficult to do. And I'm telling you that as a man who's helped countless people from around the world completely transform their relationships. All right, when it's time to move on, you have unconditional regard for your partner. That means those same things I mentioned about regard for yourself, you have to start regarding her the same ways. That's regarding a person for their humanity, not their behavior. You're no longer angry or resentful. You have compassion, empathy, understanding for her. You accept who they are and the choices that she has made, even though you don't approve them. Remember in the beginning I talked about the difference between acceptance and approval? I'm not saying to approve of the choices that the woman in your life has made, only that you accept that as a person who has agency and the leadership of her own life, she has the ability to make decisions that you don't accept, or that you don't approve. And you must accept that. Otherwise, you're going to keep believing that you have a better idea how she should live than she does. And that, my friend, is judgment. And what did I tell you about judgment? It will disconnect you. Next, you've stopped waiting for her to change. And last, you've lived these truths out consistently for 6 months. Now, if you've done that, you've understood that ownership, power, and personal agency, values, and boundaries demand you to lead yourself out of any relationship that doesn't serve you. Then when you've done that, it becomes naturally clear to a man that the most loving thing he can do for himself and his partner is to let her go. If you're trying to make this decision without these things, you're going to struggle. But as a guy who's talked to plenty of men who've made this decision, every one of them are crystal clear and at peace about it. They have no hard emotions towards her. They accept, hey, this is just where she's at, but I'm at a different place. And because we have a different definition of what a relationship looks like, we have to go our different ways. And so he stops waiting for her to make that decision, and he makes it himself because it's the most clear, authentic expression of him being himself. Now, how often does this happen? Like I said, about 10% of the time, maybe. And so it's very rare that a man who's actually done the things I've just shared with you still is unhappy in a relationship, because when he starts living in these ways, he starts finding that he really enjoys his life. He enjoys his relationship, and he usually finds that his partner is joining him in some of the same things. And that's how you get out of the disillusionment stage. Now, where can you find more info? We've talked about a lot of really deep stuff today. I realize that. I know this video is long, but I hope it's been meaningful in giving you a really big overview of kind of some of the dynamics that really kind of haunt a man in a long-term relationship like marriage. So if you want to know more, I want to give you a few things to do, a few ways to follow up. The first would be to schedule a free session. We say this in all of our videos, and people are always skeptical, but they find out soon when they book these sessions that they're legit. We talk to guys without a sales pitch. We hear them. We give them some guidance. We offer them feedback, and it's very rewarding, and it's very valuable to these men. And we do this one time for a man without any strings attached, no sales funnel, none of that. You can set that up by just scrolling below and looking in the description for that link. The next thing, if you're a man, would be to join our private men's-only community. We offer a tremendous amount of support here for the man who feels like nobody's there for him. And we offer men plenty of paths through personal transformation from very low investments like the community, which is $25 a month, to way more intense experiences that you can find out more by going to our website and looking. The next thing you could do, if you have a question, you need some clarity about something I said, email me. Send me an email to Sven at mentoring.men, and I'll be glad to respond to that as soon as I have some time. I'll give you a thoughtful, intelligent, and warm-hearted response. The next thing I would love for you to do is to hit this like button. That helps us get messages like this in front of more men that are struggling, more men that are feeling pain, more men that are feeling unsupported. We'd also love it if you subscribe, click the bell, all that stuff. And lastly, if you would leave a comment or a question, that would mean the world to us. With that, I wish you a good day. I wish you deeply connected, powerful, and thriving relationships, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.